and welcome to episode 40 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the host at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's take a look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. We have some pretty Afgoo flowers for you this week. I happen to love the genetics of this strain. It's got a lot of that Afghani in it, and it's got some Hawaiian sativa in it. All in all, it's a well-balanced, very medicinal strain. I found these particular flowers at the bargain rate of $9 a gram at Green Thumb Silverdale in Silverdale, Washington. They only charge $9 for their top shelf flowers, and that is quite a buy. Bud Tender Logan can take care of you there. He is a very knowledgeable young man. He and I see eye to eye now, unlike my first visit there. I've been about 4 times now, and we have come to an understanding. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States this week, the DEA has requested more than 30 times the amount of research marijuana it originally wanted. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration on Monday said it needs hundreds of pounds of marijuana for research this year, more than 30 times the amount of cannabis it originally ordered for 2014. The DEA accordingly adjusted its annual production quota of marijuana for the U.S. government, which is grown on the University of Mississippi's campus at Oxford. Ole Miss pot is used exclusively by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, NIDA, to conduct research on marijuana, but don't expect any studies on the medicinal benefits of cannabis. The NIDA, by definition, refuses to fund any studies looking for medical uses, but instead will only authorize studies which look for the harms of marijuana. Despite what The Blaze reported online that the NIDA pot was for medical marijuana research, that agency does not fund research focused on the potential medical benefits of marijuana, an NIDA spokesperson told the New York Times in 2010. As the National Institute on Drug Abuse, our focus is primarily on the negative consequences of marijuana use, an NIDA spokeswoman told the Times. So while some lawmakers continue to call for more studies on medical marijuana before new laws are passed, the chief federal agency charged with researching marijuana is refusing to even look at its medical applications. These public officials are tragically letting political ideology, not medical science, determine health decisions for millions of Americans. The NIDA has ramped up its research, desperate to find something, anything, to stem the powerful tide of marijuana legalization, which is sweeping across the United States and the globe. As public pressure grows to legalize, beleaguered federal agencies like the NIDA and the DEA, which depend on the war on marijuana for a big chunk of their tax-funded budgets, they need talking points to justify their untenable positions. That means that suddenly the feds think they need a lot more pot than they thought they would need. What with legalization in Colorado and Washington, the reefer madness is becoming endangered, and they just don't want it to go away. These drug warriors want people to fear the weed. The DEA had originally set a production quota of just 21 kilograms of marijuana. That's just over 46 pounds of pot for 2014. This new request bumps that quota all the way up to 650 kilograms, or 1,430 pounds. The DEA claimed the production increase is needed to ensure the NIDA has enough marijuana on which to conduct its research, that is, trying to find bad things marijuana does. NIDA recently notified the DEA that it required additional supplies of marijuana to be manufactured in 2014 to provide for current and anticipated research efforts involving marijuana, the new DEA rule states. The DEA was unaware of NIDA's additional need at the time the initial aggregate production quota for marijuana was established in September 2013. The aggregate production quota for marijuana should be increased in order to provide a continuous and uninterrupted supply of marijuana in support of DEA-registered researchers who were approved by the federal government to utilize marijuana in their research protocols, the DEA statement reads. The government can name an amount and get however much marijuana it needs. The citizens of the United States enjoy no such luxury, given that cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law. Many Democrats want the Obama administration to take pot off that list, with even some Republicans supporting such a policy change. In Washington state this week, some marijuana entrepreneurs who didn't win licenses plan lawsuits. Some would-be pot businessmen who spent months and thousands of dollars on their dream of opening a retail cannabis shop in Washington state are very disappointed that they didn't get a license in the state's marijuana license lottery. Some of them are so disappointed, in fact, that they plan to sue. Ryan Kunkel and Joel Berman, who are the owners of the Have a Heart chain of medical cannabis dispensaries with 7 locations in the Puget Sound area, applied for recreational marijuana licenses in Seattle, Ocean Shores, and in Snohomish County. These men said they've invested more than $250,000 already in their effort to open recreational marijuana stores under I-502. Kunkel and Berman plan to file a lawsuit against the Washington State Liquor Control Board this week. They are unhappy with the method the Liquor Control Board used for its license lottery. They argue that the board allowed people to game the system by applying multiple times for the same location, effectively giving themselves more chances to win a license. They're also unhappy that the board changed the rules several times midstream during the process. While the board initially had told applicants they'd have to secure a lease to apply, it later said that wouldn't be necessary, after, of course, many applicants had spent thousands of dollars on a lease. The board changed its rule to specify applicants only need to have a location in mind and a non-binding note from a landlord. But by that point, many applicants, including Berman and Kunkel, were already stuck paying rent with no guarantee they'd ever get to open. Entrepreneur Pete O'Neill, for instance, has been paying $7,800 a month rent since September for retail space he wanted to open under the name C&C Shop, LLC. O'Neill didn't win the lottery in any of the 3 locations, Seattle, Linwood, and Bremerton, he applied either. He's in talks with a licensed lottery winner in Bremerton to buy that business and with it, its retail license. I think they were in such a rush to get the job done. In fact, they violated their own rules, Kunkel said. So the people who played by the rules really got damaged and hurt. The system was sound, the Liquor Control Board stated in a prepared press release. We are communicating with applicants who were not successful in the lottery and showing them what we have. If we made a mistake, we'll own it, the board claimed. However, we're seeing a few questionable ones. There is an appeal process for those that wish to proceed. Meanwhile, the Liquor Control Board says that lottery winners can't sell their licenses, but they can sell their entire businesses. That has already begun, with several lottery winners ready to cash in by selling out to the highest bidder. In Spain this week, a city in the Basque region of the country has voted to license and regulate private marijuana clubs. The Spanish city of San Sebastian, also called Donostia, in the Basque region of Spain, has voted to license, regulate, and thus legalize private marijuana clubs. The city plans to pioneer the opening and operation of these legal cannabis clubs for both therapeutic and recreational purposes. The legislation was first approved in March by the local governing board. On April 30th, it got its first plenary ratification without any dissenting votes. After a period of arguments, it will pass the House, after which the law will come into force. Donostia city officials estimated that 2,000 people are currently members of the 21 cannabis clubs that are already operating discreetly in the city. City council members are currently drafting a manual of practices and regulations for the clubs, saying the rules are meant to protect users. You cannot ignore reality, said City Council member Meredith Aguilera, adding that having a record of marijuana clubs which exist in the city will be helpful. With these regulations, the government is attempting to fix a contradiction in the law. While the personal consumption of cannabis products is allowed, their sale isn't. According to the draft legislation, the clubs may not be closer than 300 meters to schools, and a minimum of 500 meters must be between any 2 marijuana clubs. The clubs will be prohibited at places where smoking isn't allowed, such as shopping centers, malls, and sports facilities, and they won't be allowed to install terraces on the street as bars do in Spain. The clubs will not be allowed to admit minors or to be open in hours other than 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., according to the officials. In Florida, we have reports of a student who wasn't allowed to publish a medical marijuana story in her high school newspaper. Medical marijuana will be on the ballot this November in Florida, but a high school student in Lakeland is fighting for permission to report on that story after being told it couldn't appear in her school newspaper. Abby Lane is 18. She was denied permission to publish an article about the medical marijuana ballot question that would appear in the Lakeland High School Bagpipe. The story that I was pitching to write about was a neutral, non-biased, breaking news story on medical marijuana, Abby said, but her teacher shot the idea down. They said it would be inappropriate and unacceptable, she said. She basically acted as if it was just preposterous that I would try to include a drug-related article in a high school magazine, Lane said. Appealing the case to the high school principal didn't do any good, Lane said. They were both as vague as possible without really giving an answer. Wes Bridges, attorney for the Polk County School Board, claims it was the student editorial committee, not the teacher, who turned down the medical marijuana story pitch. He also claimed the newspaper was restructured about a year ago to, quote, be used as a marketing tool and for community announcements. So much for teaching journalism. It does not fit into what we do, said Frank Webster, who heads the school's Multimedia Communications Academy. That type of article does not fit our audience, he said. We're primarily about marketing and a mouthpiece for Lakeland High School and the Harrison School of the Arts, Webster claimed. A quick check of the paper reveals general news reportage by Lane published back in March, putting the lie to Bridges' and Webster's claims. Lane, who has written for the Bagpipe for 2 years now, said she loves to contribute news articles to the paper. Some people at Lakeland High are homeless and may not get the news outside of school, she said. My thing is to highlight big problems in the world and to bring them to light locally. The more you do a story, the more you know about that particular thing, Lane said. Frank Lamonte, executive director of the Student Press Law Center, a national organization advocating for student First Amendment rights, said there could be grounds for a lawsuit here. Schools have to present educationally reasonable reasons to keep an article out of a student publication, he said. The fact that some members of the audience might disapprove of or take offense to a particular story is not an educationally reasonable basis for censorship, Lamonte said. Students can and occasionally do take their schools to court under the First Amendment and win if they are censored. And a situation like this one could certainly be a candidate. With just a few weeks left in school, Lane said she would keep fighting to keep kids informed. I feel the students should be allowed to be informed about what's going on around them, she said. If I can get this published by the end of the year, I can be satisfied, Lane said. But I haven't yet, so I'm going to keep trying. She said she would continue to include the article on the list of stories she pitches every week for use in the school paper. Lane said she is passionate about medical marijuana because she was a cancer patient as a 2-year-old. During her annual checkups, she meets young patients at the hospital, and she feels sorry that they have to go through the same pain she did. She thinks cannabis could benefit other patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. When I was in the hospital, the kids there were being treated, she said. It's very emotional and sad to look at. That's why I want to write this article. They could be given something better, Abby said. In Uruguay this week, the country will issue government-approved marijuana clones, it was announced, and non-government marijuana will still be illegal. Uruguay President Jose Mujica said on Friday that his country's system of marijuana legalization, which will allow only government-approved strains and under which all other cannabis will still be illegal, will be better than Colorado's, whose cannabis law he called fiction and hypocrisy. President Mujica seems a little confused about the law in Colorado, complaining that many people fake illnesses to get medical marijuana. He seems to be conflating 2012's recreational legalization vote with 2000's medical marijuana referendum, which was approved by voters. Mujica said the licensed and regulated market in Uruguay will be much less permissive with marijuana users than in Colorado's system. Mujica, a former leftist guerrilla known as the poorest president in the world, predicted that many will call him an old reactionary once they see the strict marijuana rules. We don't go along with the idea that marijuana is a benign, poetic, and surrounded by virtues, President Mujica said, disappointing many who had thought he was pretty cool. No addiction is good, he said. We aren't going to promote smoke fests, bohemianism, all this stuff that they try to pass off as innocuous when it isn't, Mujica said, removing any doubt that his country's brand of legalization will come with a ridiculous dose of Catholic guilt. They'll label us old reactionaries, he said, but this isn't a policy that seeks to expand marijuana consumption, the president said, as his formerly hip image collapsed around him in ruins. What it aims to do is keep it all within reason and now allow it to become an illness. Oh, you mean like reefer madness, Jose? Uruguay plans to create clones of government-approved cannabis strains so that police can test the marijuana possessed by licensed users and ensure that it's government weed. And if that sounds like a George Orwell nightmare to you, yeah, me too. Possession of non-government marijuana, that is to say cannabis lacking the genetic markers of approved plants, will be criminally punished. Unlike Colorado, which licenses recreational marijuana merchants and growers but allows any adult to buy up to an ounce at the time, Uruguay will also license cannabis users and will limit their purchases to 10 grams a week through government tracking. It's a complete fiction what they do in Colorado, Mujica scoffed. There are places where there are forms already filled out with a doctor's signature. So you go, you say you need marijuana because your ear hurts, they fill out the form, you prescribe it yourself and with the signature of a doctor. This is a brutal hypocrisy. No, President Mujica, what you don't bother to inform yourself about recreational marijuana in Colorado, under which no illness at all is required to partake, you numbskull. There's a different brutal word for it, sir. It's called brutal ignorance. In Texas this week, a man faces 5 years to life in prison for making marijuana brownies. A Texas man could get 5 years to life for no more than many of us do on a regular basis without a second thought. Jacob Lavoro of Round Rock is accused of making and selling the pot-infused treats. If convicted, he could get a longer term than many murderers do in the Lone Star State. Since Lavoro's recipe included hash oil, infused coconut oil, in addition to marijuana, the longer sentences kick in, according to Jamie Spencer, who's legal counsel for the Texas chapter of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Possession of the smallest amount of marijuana is a misdemeanor, Spencer said. Possession of the tiniest amount of hash, even a gram, is a state jail felony. Texas law stupidly allows law enforcement to include the weight of the sugar, butter, and other ingredients when calculating the total weight of the marijuana, with about 660 grams, or about 1.5 pounds, of brownies in question. Lavoro's case is a first-degree felony punishable by 5 years to life in state prison. That's higher than the punishment range for sexual assault, higher than the punishment range for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, Spencer said. It's kind of crazy. This case is the perfect example of the insanity of Texas's drug laws, Spencer said, especially when it comes to marijuana or anything where the active ingredient is THC. Lavoro is being held at the Williamson County Jail on a $30,000 bond. In Colorado this week, we have an Army veteran who wants to give away marijuana to others who have served in the military. A Vietnam-era Army veteran wants to give away cannabis to other military veterans, and it's a simple matter, the way Roger Martin sees it. True patriots support cannabis for heroes, he said. Martin, 61, said he's on a mission to help veterans in Colorado, and by helping them, he means giving them free weed, to help them be in a position where they can lessen the drug use they're taking and hopefully live a more productive life, he said. He's the executive director of Operation Grow for Vets, a nonprofit that gives away free marijuana and growing supplies to Colorado veterans who are hooked on prescription drugs or who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Martin said that 2 years ago he was hooked on OxyContin. He said that his life changed when another doctor switched him to cannabis. His website, www.grow and the numeral 4vets.org, you can find that link on the Hemp News story, says cannabis is a safe alternative to deadly drug cocktails. The group only went online for the first time on Tuesday night, and by Wednesday morning, more than 200 veterans had already applied for free marijuana. Veterans and companies are donating marijuana, edibles, cannabis oil, and growing supplies, according to Martin. "We owe these veterans," Martin said. "When you enlist in the military, they promise to take care of you. A lot of times they don't." Just last week, Colorado lawmakers voted to deny marijuana as an approved treatment for PTSD. "I think it's an absolute disgrace," Martin said. "Where is the compassion?" He said he plans to fight that decision. Giving marijuana away is legal under Amendment 64, the 2012 voter-approved measure that legalized cannabis in Colorado. Martin said anyone who wants to stop him is welcome to try. "If somebody wants to step up and challenge us when we're helping veterans, if they think that's the PC thing to do, good luck to them," he said. More than 200 Colorado legislators voted against allowing medical marijuana as a treatment for PTSD. Before we go this week, there's a must-read story that you really should check out on tokesignals.com. The story is called "Book Gives an Insider's View of World's Biggest Hippie Commune." The hippie. Emerging from the ruins of the Beat Generation, the hippie had a brief shining moment at the apex of the popular imagination, encapsulating both the highest hopes and the darkest fears of the post-Kennedy world. That archetype of societal rebellion, of consciousness expansion, and of generational schism has outlasted the era from which it sprang, and it's become an essential part of the American mythos. But behind the archetypes and beyond the myths was a real social phenomenon, a game-changing explosion of art, music, and awareness that changed American society and the world forever. In 1970, hundreds of hippies followed Guru Stephen Gaskin on a journey from San Francisco to the hills of Summertown, Tennessee, where they founded on May 10th, 1971, an archetypal commune known as The Farm. Within this self-sustaining society based on nonviolence, vegetarianism, and respect for the earth, members willingly took a vow of poverty, lived in converted buses, grew their own food, and home-delivered their babies. Communal living was one of the purest expressions of hippie culture, and the farm became the biggest, longest-lived, and most successful hippie commune of them all. To outsiders, the farm could be a mysterious place, and of course that means people projected their hopes and fears onto the commune, the same way they did onto the hippie culture at large. For the first 40 years after its founding, there was no real inside look at the early days of the farm. But Melvin Steeris's excellent, indispensable Voluntary Peasant series is nicely filling that gap at least. To learn all about Melvin's book, where you can get it, and for some great riveting excerpts from the book, visit tokesignals.com this week. I hope you decide to join us again next week for episode 41. Until then, why not stay lifted? See you then.